My advice I think I wish I would have gotten would be don't rush. I think I felt a lot of pressure coming out of my undergrad that I had to know my next step or I had to have a next step. And sometimes just sitting back and thinking about what is interesting or what you don't want to do can kind of help lead to whatever you do next.
Welcome to episode 24 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Katrina Pukitis, Winery Laboratory Technician with Jackson-Triggs Niagara Estate. Jackson-Triggs Estate Winery produces a wide variety of wines, which include Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, and so much more. What is exciting about them is that their estate also serves as a research center, which is dedicated to maximizing fruit quality, and they track the impact of different clone and rootstock combinations. They look at soil conditions, pruning techniques on a range of different grapes, which is very cool. On this episode, Katrina and I covered a lot of topics, which include learning about Jackson-Triggs and their line of products. Katrina gave me the lowdown on the general process of winemaking and threw in a little bit of science for me to understand how grapes turn into wine. We also dived into her career journey, learning about her path and how she got to where she is today, what she does for her job, and some of the skills that she is developing. Overall, this was a great conversation, and I learned so much about wine. Katrina is really good at explaining things in a way that is easy to understand. She also rounds out the episode with some really good advice students need to hear if they're going to go into the food industry, but I think the advice also applies to any of those at any stage of their career. Anyways, enough with that introduction. Let's get on to the show. Thank you, Katrina, for coming on the show. We were just talking about before the show. I'm really excited to learn more about your role in working in the wine area. I know for a lot of people, that's kind of a dream job that they aspire to retire to. So for you to be early on in your career doing that, it's going to be cool to learn more about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
For me, I know this brand of wine quite well. I see it every time to the LCBO, but for those who don't know, could you tell me more about where you work, which is Jackson-Triggs, and their line of products and what you do there?
Absolutely. I work at the Jackson-Triggs Niagara Estate Winery. We do also have Jackson-Triggs Estate out in Oliver, BC. We're located in Niagara on the Lake, Ontario. We were first established and started making and selling wine back in 1993, and we've kind of continued to do that since then, expanding the brand. Yeah, like you said, you're familiar with it. I'm sure you've seen our products in the LCBO. Those are ones that we make enough of that we can obviously supply to the LCBO, as well as we have products that we only carry at the winery. So those ones we make a bit less of them. They're maybe a bit more unique. We also do make a decent amount of sparkling wine, as well as our regular table wines, and a little bit of ice wine, but not a ton of it.
Okay. Yeah, no, they're definitely, I'll be honest, one of the ones that stand out for me is it's kind of a staple there, but especially I'll be honest, the box wines are
Sure.
definitely in the area. But you mentioned sparkling wines, and I'm not too familiar with those types of wines and how they're processed differently. I know I'm already jumping ship, but I just wanted to know a little bit more about those types of wines.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll also preface with saying if I use any terminology that doesn't make sense, please stop me and I'll explain it. There's
Sounds
just
good.
certain kind of industry words that I'm used to using. But yeah, so for sparkling wine, there's pretty much two methods through which you can make a sparkling wine, both of which start off with you start to make essentially a regular table wine. So it's not sparkling, it'd be like a regular wine you get in a bottle, and then you The first method is called charmat or cuvee close. Basically what those words mean is you're taking that, we call it a base wine, you're putting it into a tank that can be pressurized, and then you're essentially forcing the carbon dioxide into it to like make it sparkling. Or you can also do a second fermentation with yeast in the vessel as well in a tank. It just kind of depends how you decide to make it. The other method is traditional method. So this is where you again take your base wine, you actually put it into a wine bottle. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but a sparkling wine bottle can sometimes be like a bit thicker, a bit heavier.
Yeah.
Like the glass is really durable. And that's basically so it can withstand the pressure of the fermentation. So yeah, you basically put your wine and then some sugar and some yeast into a bottle and you seal it up. And then you actually get another second alcoholic fermentation in the bottle. And since it's kind of captured in, then the carbon dioxide stays dissolved in the wine and then it creates the bubbles.
That's fascinating that you can kind of just mix it all in there and then have it do its own thing without any extra steps. And then I'm assuming over time you would have a set time, but then to sell it to the consumer, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of winemakers are really fascinated with making sparkling wine because of what you said. I mean, you're putting all of this stuff into a bottle and then you would just have to kind of let it sit and see what happens and hope that by the time it gets to the consumer, it's ended up becoming what you want it to be.
So it does sound like you are quite knowledgeable about all this type of stuff, which isn't surprising considering what you do. So we're going to backtrack and I want to know more about your story and particularly how your career story, your journey, how it led you to where you are right now. So if you could you just kind of walk us through that?
Absolutely. So I started off back in 2015 doing an undergraduate degree in nutrition and dietetics at Western. So I was attending Brescia College there. I started off purely because I was very interested in nutrition and health and wellness. I didn't have wine in mind whatsoever. And I didn't think about it too much as I made my way through undergrad. Fourth year rolled around, and a lot of my peers were starting to apply to internships and master's programs to ultimately pursue a career as a dietitian, which is awesome. And I really respect the work dietitians do. I just had zero interest in kind of entering the healthcare field. And so I was then in this position where I had to figure out what my next step was. So I started shopping around programs, and I had recently, the summer before my fourth year, lived in Niagara for a couple months, unrelated to wine. I was working in a different industry, but I loved living here and I loved visiting the wineries. And so I had it in my brain to maybe see if you could pursue higher education in wine. I really didn't know. So then I came across Brock and their Cool Climate Enology and Viticulture Institute, which essentially means a cool climate wine and vineyard institute. And so they do offer a full undergrad. They also offer what I took, which is a certificate in grape and wine technology, which is a great program. It essentially, if you have a Bachelor of Science, you don't have to take any of the prerequisite courses. You can then jump right into taking the wine-based courses.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I got 1 year of a really intense wine-focused education, which was awesome. Like,
That really is.
yeah, I kind of jumped into it head first and it kept going. Yeah, so then as part of my program, you have to complete co-op placement. And unfortunately, that was happening during COVID for me. So I originally thought I was maybe going to do like a marketing placement. I thought I might be interested in that, but that wasn't really available since no one was working in offices at the time.
Fair enough.
So what I ended up doing this past fall was a harvest placement at Jackson-Triggs. So I can get into a bit more exactly what harvest is when I explain the winemaking process, but I essentially was like a 4-month contract intern with the company to help with bringing the fruit in when it was ready in the fall. And just kind of through having a good relationship with my boss, and also us losing our lab tech while I was there, they kind of gave me the shot at taking over the role. So that was back in last November, and I've been there ever since.
Wow, that sounds okay. The fact that I like the first fact is that you kind of picked it based on well, you didn't pick it, but you started to get inspiration about your next career move from simply the environment and living and choosing kind of the area that you want to live in, I guess I could say. And then that, I mean, we're in an awesome region with Lower Ontario where there's so much great agriculture. And of course, Niagara is well world known for its winemaking region. So the fact that there's also a degree program that you can take for a year that's intensively about wine, I just think that's so cool.
Yeah, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do after my undergrad, I was really curious and trying to find a field that did have some type of agricultural connection, because that was important to me. So this obviously fit really well into that. And then, yeah, also speaking to the Brock program, if you want to, you can go on to get a master's and PhD in, they call it a viticulture and enology. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, you can also get the same type of degree in like Australia and in France. And I had no idea prior to this that you could get it here.
No, honestly, I had no idea. And even now you mentioning about a master's and PhD program, like I honestly had never even thought about that even being a thing.
Yeah, and also Niagara College here as well offers a similar program to what I took as a 2-year college program. And it's very hands-on, like they get lots of in-person experience. So it's super cool. Like there's lots of opportunity if you're interested in the industry, which is great.
For sure. And leading you now to being as a laboratory technician, what kind of tests or what do you do on a daily basis for this job so far?
Yeah, so being a laboratory technician, I think it can mean different things depending on where you are, like what winery you're working at. So for myself, I'm the only person working in the lab. So it's a mixture of obviously running all of our tests, but also maintaining the lab. So day to day, I guess I kind of play a mixture of like a quality control, quality assurance role, in that I have to make sure that our products obviously aren't faulted and that the consumer isn't getting a bad product, but I'm also running tests that the winemakers need. So tests that I run, it's a lot of, I guess, like almost like analytical chemistry, and I'm testing acids. So our pH, the titratable acidity of the wine, the sugar content of the wine, the alcohols. We also add sulfur to the products, which I know is on the label, and lots of people always have lots of questions about the sulfur content in wine, but it's basically there to provide microbiological and oxidative protection for the product.
Okay.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time making sure that the sulfur levels are in a place that the wine is protected, because if not, then basically you can get like bad flavors or bad smells, and then it'll be hard to make a good wine out of it at the end of the day. So yeah, those are the kind of like standard tests that I run. I also have to do a lot of stability tests. So you have to make sure that a wine is heat and cold stable, that if someone throws it in the fridge or if it sits in a hot car for a day, that nothing weird's going to happen. So that's really important as well. And then sometimes the winemakers might need to make like adjustments or small additions to the wine. So we will often run a trial beforehand so that we kind of get a good idea of the best thing we can do with the wine before kind of going ahead and making an addition. So then, yeah, I also do a lot of, we call them benchtop trials. So that's kind of a screenshot. I also do quality control for our bottling. So that's a bit more looking at like labels, and if there's a cork or if there's a screw cap, making sure that that's all put on properly, so that again, when that product gets to the person buying that bottle of wine, it's what they expect it's going to be.
That's fascinating in terms of, again, another thing is wine is I think of wines being, you keep them at this pristine temperature and all those types of factors, but to know that the producers or the winemakers are also thinking about all these factors to make sure that it can help the wine is able to stay in the good quality in all these different conditions. Wow, that's a lot of forethought, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's yeah, a lot of people like to say that winemaking is the intersection of art and science, because on one hand, you want it to taste really good, obviously, and especially if you're making wine at a very high level, sometimes you're kind of doing something that no one else has done. But at the same time, yeah, it has to be like essentially a chemically sound product that is gonna be able to sit on a shelf till someone buys it, or yeah, like sit in someone's fridge for 3 days and nothing's going to happen to it. So yeah, it's very interesting from that perspective.
Thinking about how, thinking about the end consumer product, I really don't know much about actually even making wine. I mean, I know it's not how it is, but it's just this typical image you get is you squish some grapes and then you stick it in a bottle, which I know is definitely not how is the case. So I'd love to know a little bit more in depth,
Yeah.
or how you're particularly Jackson-Triggs does it. That'd be pretty good to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I will do my absolute best. It is hard to explain if you haven't seen it. So I'm going to try and give like a really basic understanding of the
Let's do that.
process. But I guess a good thing to start off with too is like if you've done a winery tour, and usually they'll show you like lots of barrels and lots of tanks. So that's kind of like what my workspace looks like. So basically, since it is obviously it's a fruit that we're working with, and so because of that, we're somewhat at the whim of when the grapes are ripe, to basically when we get to pick them. So the vineyard managers and the winemaker will make a decision that the grapes are ready, so they'll harvest them, and then those grapes will then be brought to the winery facility, and then at that point you do squish them. So basically, unless, I mean, there's like lots of exceptions to the rule where people will leave it as a whole cluster, but in general, you're going to squish the grapes, and you're also going to take out all of like the stems and leaves and stuff, so that what you're getting is like kind of like a pulp of grape juice and grape skins. And that's all going to go into a press. And what they then do is obviously press the juice off of all of those skins. So I should also say that for white wine, you do that pressing right away, because especially if you're using green grapes, that juice is already clear. The juice doesn't have to sit with those skins for any reason. So you harvest the grapes, you press them, you get the juice, and then that will go into a white wine fermentation tank. And you don't always have to, some wineries don't, but you can add yeast to inoculate it, and then it'll go through an alcoholic fermentation. So the yeast eat up the sugar that's naturally present in the juice, and they produce ethanol and carbon dioxide, and they'll basically eat that sugar until it's gone, and then you get a wine. Essentially, the only difference in that process with red wine is that for the most part, the grapes used for red wine making have a red skin, but the juice is still clear. So the color in red wine actually comes from that juice spending time with the skins.
Oh.
Yeah. So what we do a bit differently for the red wines is, again, we do, bring them to the winery and you process them. So you kind of get, again, like the skin and juice mixture, but you then will let that sit for a designated period of time. It kind of depends what the winemaker wants. Usually that fermentation will kind of start with the juice still with the skins. We let it ferment completely with the skins, and then once the fermentation's done, you press the juice off the skins, and that way you have that really, really nice red color.
Oh, okay. Yes, I would not intuitively think about that, but at the same time, when you're looking at purple, I guess you could say purple, red, but for red wine, you're looking at purple grapes. And when you actually look inside, it's not purple, but I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you think about a red table grape, like if you're buying grapes from the grocery store, it is red on the outside, but the inside is more of like almost like a green color. It's the exact same for our wine grapes. And like a good way to think of it too is rosé. So if you get a rosé that was like 100% a Pinot Noir rosé, so that means that they basically picked those red wine grapes and then they just press the juice off the skins really quickly. And so you just get like a little bit of pink color that you get in the rosé. But if they had let that sit for the whole fermentation, then you would have gotten a red wine.
Okay. And then the amount of time that you allow it to ferment, is that, of course, you get different flavor differences from the grapes, but a large portion also comes, I would think, from how long it ferments for?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, fermentations have a bit of a mind of their own once they start. I mean, because yeast are alive, obviously. We only have so much control over what happens, but temperature is a really good way to kind of control how long a fermentation goes. So if you ferment at a cooler temperature, the yeast won't be as active. So you get a slower, longer fermentation. That's usually what you do for white wines. Versus if you have the juice at a hotter temperature, the yeast are a lot more active. It goes a lot faster. And so red wines usually ferment at a warmer temperature and it goes a lot faster. And you also get more color extraction because of the temperature. So you really get that nice red color.
Okay. And then with grapes, I know that we live in a place where there's winters. So I'm curious about, I know that there's ice wines, but I'm assuming the winemaking process is something that's like seasonal. Would you be working all year round? How does that portion, working with agriculture, work for you?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I was a harvest intern. So basically what that means is we, in the fall, obvious is when the grapes are ready to be picked, and the normal winery staff, most places need help. So in the fall, you bring on extra staff to help with your harvest. So that's what I did. And so the fall is really the busiest time of the year because you're bringing in all the fruit, you're processing it, you have to monitor all your fermentations. And then if you are doing ice wine, that busy season then carries over into the winter. Ice wine is usually like maybe late November, December. People pick the ice wine grapes. And then this is our quieter time of year, kind of this in between spring. Because, I mean, for me personally in the lab, it's quiet. If you're working in the vineyard, then you would be out tending to the vines and pruning them through kind of the late winter into the early spring because they have to get ready for the growing season. And then those grapevines grow all summer. And then the fruit's ready in the fall and you restart.
It sounds like a great, if a student can't, well, maybe it's not ideal for like school time, but it does sound like a great job if someone wanted to dip their toes into something that's like contract and seasonal, just to see if they're into that type of space.
Absolutely. Yeah, people do that a lot. So it's a great way to travel as well. A lot of times people will get a harvest contract in like New Zealand, and then you'll go work 4 months in New Zealand. You know that it's that 4 month period you'll be there. You get to experience working there, and then it's just a taste, and then you get to come back home. And same also for working, if you're working on like the winery tasting bar, it's a great kind of way to get exposure to the industry in like the summer season, and you get to interact with people. And then if you like it, great. If not, then it was kind of like this short period.
And when you were finding the places when you did these internships, was it through your school that you found out about it, or did you come across it on like an ad or something like that?
I came across the Jackson-Triggs position just through like the hiring website, but Brock does provide help through the co-op office to get people positions.
Okay.
For sure. And I mean, the thing with that is too, you can work in really like any aspect of the wine industry. So, I mean, like I said, you can do marketing. Sometimes like the governing bodies will hire people. So there's like the VQA or the Grape Growers of Ontario. They'll take on co-op students. So there's lots of opportunity if you're kind of willing to look for it.
That's pretty cute. Sorry, you did say VQA. I'm just not familiar with that terminology.
Yeah, sorry. So the VQA is the Vintners Quality Alliance. So they are the governing body that basically sets wine regulations for like making wine in Ontario. The only caveat to that is it's not mandatory to have your wine be VQA certified, but for the most part people do. And I mean, like if you go into the LCBO and you go to the Ontario section, that wine is all going to be VQA Ontario wine. And basically they exist just to maintain a high quality and high standard of winemaking, and to make sure there's regulations so that people can't do crazy stuff, because for the most part, consumers don't always know what's happening behind the scenes. They just get that end product. So it kind of protects the consumer, but also gives us guidelines for the winemaking.
That makes sense. But it's so cool. I had no idea that something like that it makes sense that it exists, but I had no idea that it did, to be honest with you. And to know that they take on students for like a co-op position, and that I just had no idea, and that's pretty cool.
For sure, yeah. It's very interesting. Like they kind of provide, it's their part almost marketing for Ontario wine. Like it's pretty easy to find. If you look up Ontario wine, you'll probably see a VQA ad, but then they also, regulate what we do.
Well, to be honest, I have seen that acronym before, but I don't know why I just associated with it being like a winery or something, which makes no sense, but I just assumed it was that. So to learn what it actually is, I have learned something new.
Yeah. I mean, basically, if you get a bottle of VQA wine, it means it's like 100% Ontario grapes. There is also VQA BC, but for the most part, it means that you're getting true Ontario wine.
So for someone who's been working in the wine, and you're in the quality area, I was curious about your job, and I know you talked about the skills that you use in it, but I wanted to know about why you are loving your job right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice because every day is a little bit different, and that comes along with the seasonality of the job. Obviously, through the 4 seasons, we're doing very different things, but also I'm on my feet every day in the lab doing work, and then I might get pulled into the cellar to do physical work with the wine, or I might be bottling that day, or the winemakers might need me to do something. So I think what I like the most about it is it's very hands-on, and the day is almost never what I think it's going to be, which is nice. Like it keeps it interesting, and you learn something every day.
I love that. And just imagining the actual atmosphere that you work in with the cellars and the different types of people, and like being able to do what you just said, be on the line, but then also doing your quality testing, that would definitely as someone who's in QC, you would definitely see all aspects of the plant. And I could just imagine how much you're learning on the day to day.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it is, especially in the cellar, it's hard work to make wine. And so really you end up with a group of people that are very passionate about what they're doing, which is so fun because everyone cares so much about what you're making, that every day, like you said, I'm seeing a lot. And yeah, like it's great to be part of a team where everyone is willing to pull their weight.
And because you're learning so many new things, I could imagine that there's always some kind of skill that you're wanting to improve on. Is there anything right now that you're wanting to develop or you currently are working on?
Yeah, I think definitely I'd like to develop my formal wine tasting skills more. Conveniently, I'm actually going to be doing a course through work pretty soon, which is great. Yeah, so there's a whole program called the WSET program. So it's the letter W, SET. And they have basically course levels 1 through 3. I think 4 is you become a sommelier. So it's a great way to basically learn the basics about tasting wine and the world wine regions. So I'm going to be doing my level 2 soon, which is great. So that's something I'm definitely wanting to learn, and always improving my lab skills. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with my position, but I also never did like a technical lab program per se. So, I mean, there's a lot I can still learn about running a lab and also kind of the methods I'm using.
Of course. I mean, you do stuff in school, but you do it throughout your school program and you do your weekly labs, but it's definitely different in the thick of things when you want to get better in the day to day and really just own your skills and feel confident in them. So
absolutely, yeah. And I was in a unique position where I wasn't really trained by the previous lab tech. We basically lost them, and then there was this vacant space that they then brought me in to fill, which meant a lot of it was me teaching myself how to do the tests, which was great because I got to work independently. And yeah, really, I was given a lot of freedom to figure it out. But then at the same time, I had to learn how to run a lab in a month or two. So it was a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I think it's fascinating that you're going to be learning more about proper tasting, because although there's so much to like every type of food product, wine is definitely as a beverage so unique to any other thing, and that there's these proper tasting methods to it and proper flavor tones and explaining all those different types of things. So I'm almost excited for you to know that you'll be like learning that.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think it obviously it will help with work, but it's also just a genuine curiosity of mine outside of the 9 to 5 per se. So yeah, I'm really excited, and it only really helps going forward. And it's fun to talk about.
Of course, to be able to properly talk. I mean, for most people, of course, you can limitedly say this food tastes good, it tastes sweet, I can taste this, but to actually properly say that, it's just a whole new skill set.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, it kind of ties into just being in the food industry and beverage industry in general, like feeling like you have a true grasp on the product that you're working with is great, because a lot of people know a lot.
For sure. But I still think that you would be someone who would be very well to know this. I wanted to know if you had any recommendations that someone, if they wanted to, they've heard this podcast and they've heard about where you work and they want to know some more about the wine. Which one should they get started with? What do you recommend, and how would be the best way to drink it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously drink all of the Jackson-Triggs wine. Um, no, but I think what I'll try and give just like general, maybe Ontario suggestions. Ontario has really great sparkling wine and also really good Riesling. If you like a white wine, you can get that really from like a nice, really dry table wine or to a nice sweet wine. Riesling gives a really nice profile and range. So that's a really solid choice from Ontario. As well as for reds, Cabernet Franc grows wonderfully here, which is a really nice red wine as well. It's also nice. It's usually not too expensive, which is really important.
Yeah.
And then the best way to drink wine, I mean, I guess it depends. Like, obviously, sparkling cold and with friends when it's not COVID, because sparkling wine.
Well, let's narrow it down. So let's just pick like one from Jackson-Triggs, and you can tell me, let's say the one that you drink the most from Jackson-Triggs. What
Sure.
would be it there, and how would you drink it?
Yeah, for sure. I really like our Entourage Brut sparkling wine. So that one is a white sparkling wine. It's off dry, so it's like a little bit sweet, but it's not too sweet. I like to have it pretty cold. So usually I'll just throw it in the fridge for like a couple hours before I want to open it. And I really like to have sparkling wine with like a cheese board. So
Oh,
um, yeah, lots of lots of meats and cheeses and nuts, but also like fruit is really nice as well. It balances out nicely. You have a bit of sweetness, but if you get like some nice berries, the acidity balances out really nicely. What else? I also really like sparkling wine with like cheesecake. That's always
oh,
a nice
that-
mixture.
that's
Yeah,
a good idea.
especially
I don't think people think of that, to be honest. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Since I sparkling wine is nice and light, when you get that carbonation, it kind of like refreshes your palate. So it's nice to have something maybe like a bit heavier with it because it can hold up to a heavier food versus if you had like a really heavy, maybe like I don't know, Cabernet Sauvignon. You wouldn't want to have it with like cheesecake because that would be gross. So
Okay. I don't know why I got the impression that you would actually want to drink something heavy with a heavier thing to like match each other, but I guess that's not the case.
you can. I mean, it's food and wine pairing is a whole art on its own. But yeah, I mean, there's like basic principles of like sweet and sour, and then like especially with red wines, you have a lot of tannin in there. Like that's like that drying feeling in your mouth. So
Okay.
then heavier fatty foods go really nicely because it balances out that drying sensation.
Okay. Hmm. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to make some recommendations to some people because I love cheesecake. So,
There you go. Cheesecake goes with everything.
oh, I know. I know. A lot of people don't really care for cheesecake, but I don't know. It's like one of my favorite desserts. So
Oh, absolutely. I fully support it.
nice. But so we are actually coming down close to the end of our chat, which I've learned so much about wine in just this short amount of time. So I'm really happy that we're sharing that with others. But with a few more questions that I wanted to ask, the first of which being, why do you think the food and beverage industry is a great place to work?
It is a great place to work, I think, because there is opportunity to kind of pursue a lot of careers within the industry. So I say that and be in, for example, like you can work in wine and you can work in accounting or marketing or legal consult. Like you can do so much within the industry, but it's also endlessly interesting. So I think it provides a great balance of like not normal career path, but you can fall into it from almost any walk of life. So I think it's really great that like you can do what I'm doing where like you try to start early, or you can work another job for 10 years and be like, you know what, I want to get into food and wine. And it's very, very like reasonable to do that. And again, as I mentioned before, there's so much passion within the industry. People care so much about what they're doing. And that just leads to, I think, like a really exciting day-to-day work life.
I definitely have to agree. And even showing, who knows, maybe that 4 months that you help work on the vineyard leads to something you would never even imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I've met winemakers who were doctors and they
Oh,
just wanted a change in career and they pursued winemaking. Like it's so interesting the people that this industry attracts. It's a really, really great community from that perspective.
oh, I definitely have to agree. And knowing that there's some career changers in, like, again, hearing that you're earlier on in your career and you've been choosing to work in the wine industry, but I know a lot of people who are on the later years of their life, close to retirement or even in retirement, and they decide to go work in the wine industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think you mentioned when we first started talking that it's an industry people almost look at for retirement, or people who have money to invest in a winery, and that's after having a full career. So yeah, you get people from lots of different stages and lots of different walks of life who kind of find this industry that they're interested and passionate about, and it's like this melting pot of kind of cool people.
Totally. I mean, that's how I got in contact. Like, if it wasn't for this cool industry, I wouldn't be on this podcast talking to people doing some really cool things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because of that, I think that it would be a good time to also ask, on your end, if you could give advice to a new graduate or a student who's looking to get into the field that you are, what advice would you give them?
Just to clarify, wine in particular or like the food industry?
I'm going to let you take where you think that your advice would be better suited.
Okay.
We're all good. Just pick whatever comes to your mind. I think that the most honest answers are the best ones.
Yeah, I think my advice I wish I would have gotten would be don't rush. I think I felt a lot of pressure coming out of my undergrad that I had to know my next step or I had to have a next step. And sometimes just sitting back and thinking about what is interesting or what you don't want to do can kind of help lead to whatever you do next. I think it's, just maybe try not to put too much pressure on succeeding, because I feel like most of the time no one feels like they're ever succeeding. So pursuing what you're interested in and passionate about is the most important thing you can do, especially if you're young and have your whole life ahead of you.
I think that's great advice. I know that during school, the pressure just starts when you're in high school to figure it out. And then you start to get to university and you're like, I still don't know what the heck I'm going to be doing.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times with like the conversations I've had with people, you don't even need to, you could just figure it out while you're figuring it out. And sometimes it's in the moment that you figure, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And it's what I really have been enjoying. I didn't know that I liked it, but here I am.
Yeah, I think also like it's important to feel like you hopefully don't have regrets. Like if there's something you've always wanted to try, then might as well try. I mean, you'll either find out if you liked it or you didn't, or if it was great or it wasn't. You won't know unless you give it a chance. So I'm still trying to do that.
For sure. I like that advice, because honestly, I wish I could give myself that in my first year. Like I just felt so much pressure to get it figured out, that I want to work at this company and this job in 4 years, and I'm going to do this. I just felt so much pressure. Now that I've graduated and I'm doing my master's degree now, I don't really know what my next steps are, but I'm at a place where I actually for once feel like that's okay. Like I don't have to know 5 years down the line.
I completely agree. I think it's easy to build a plan in your head and feel like at some point you'll have the realization that you arrived, but I don't really know if that ever happens. And so it's enjoying the process, because really that is kind of the end goal, is enjoying every day, ideally.
For sure. And again, alluding to just in the past episode, there was one of the ladies that I was talking about who's actually the CEO of Copper Branch Foods. She didn't figure that's what she wanted until she had her whole career in like big business. And then she, out of the blue, got a franchise and figured that, oh, this is actually really what I enjoy. And she was well at the beyond her career. So I think what you just rings true to what you just said, is just to enjoy the day to day, and you don't need to rush it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's important.
Well, I think that's a good place to end the show. But before I do, I just want to ask one last question. If people wanted to find you, where could we find you?
I'm on LinkedIn at my full name, Katrina Pukitis. Same for social media as well. That's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, you can find me, reach out. I'm happy to talk to anyone about the industry. I mean, and if I don't know, there's people who know so much more than I do that I can kind of direct people towards. Okay,
I love it. I'll make sure to link it in the show notes so people have an easier time for finding that. So thank you, Katrina, for coming on the show. I learned so much about wine, and I'm kind of excited I'm going to be excited to share this. And I know I'm going to be definitely talking to a few people after this and tell them what I just learned. So that was episode 24 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads website by clicking the podcast tab on the homepage. There you can find any notes to any past or future episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, then consider leaving a review on wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many of them out there, and we would really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for your free FoodGrads account. You can create your searchable profile, include skills, career aspirations, and multiple resumes tailored for different job opportunities, all focused on the food industry. Joining will connect you to an amazing network of food and beverage professionals, the next generation of food. Anyways, that's it for this week's podcast. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.